Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here with Ed Lecore for Brain Porn 4. We'll be discussing various things in a philosophical way, starting with Brexit. Shall we begin on?
Yes, why not?
All right, which is pretty astounding. One of the very few times in human history that an empire has voted to fall apart and peacefully. So far, it's been peaceful. It's not really an empire falling apart.
But it is in a sense, yes.
It's the beginning of disintegration.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is that the EU was the beginnings of an empire, just the beginnings. And it was originally supposed to be a trade agreement, and that's the point. It was empire by the back door. And it's just interesting watching people try to come to terms with this issue, because a lot of people, for example, there's a rhetoric right now among the left that Nigel Farage and the Brexit vote and all that has destroyed Britain. They're absolutely convinced it's destroyed Britain. And apart from the fact that that's a pragmatic argument, not a principled argument, they're ignoring the fact that the EU is morally indefensible. They're not even trying to defend it. And there's no arguments here. It's just rhetoric. They just say these things like, oh, it's destroyed Britain, it's destroyed Britain, and they just repeat it amongst themselves. They can't explain why it has or how it has. And they can't explain why Brexit was wrong morally. That's the point here. Their argument's always pragmatic. And it's just an interesting way of looking at it. They don't seem to have any habit of principle, of thinking in principle, of acting in principle, of arguing for anything on principle. They don't seem to have any sense that morality has anything to do with any of the political or economic positions they argue for. They always resort to a pragmatic argument. No, it's going to economically destroy. But was it wrong, though? And that never occurs to any of them. And it's fascinating watching this pure amoral pragmatism at work.
They're an interesting bunch, the left, because they use the moral argument like in economics. Like, you can't have companies making a profit because it's immoral. And, well, you say, okay, but if you do away with the profit, it's going to destroy everything. They say, I don't care. We're going to nationalize it, and they're at least not going to be making a profit anymore. So they are principled on the side of moral, what they call morality, of course. We don't call that morality. But then when they object to this political maneuver, they don't use any specifics. I mean, specifically, it's going to be difficult to make trade deals now. You have to renegotiate trade deals. That's a problem.
Yes. I mean, right? It's going to be hard. There's no common. We may be leaving the common market outright. Teresa, the reason I'm talking about this is that front page art of a lot of newspapers today, because I look at the front pages of every newspaper every day to get a gauge as to what people are talking about. And today, a lot of people are talking about the fact that our new Prime Minister has begun has just scrapped all the EU laws in Britain.
Right.
All of them. They're gone now. And the interesting thing is that all the right-wing papers were reporting this because they're delighted, of course, as they should be. All the left-wing papers are completely ignoring it.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because it highlights why Brexit occurred. Because there are loads of our laws that are made by Brussels bureaucrats who don't represent Britain, who aren't British, who are arrogant and aloof and are unknown to the British people and aren't democratically elected and have shown contempt for democracy. They're the ones making up all our laws. And when you actually see that, when you process that, you realize that's the best argument you could possibly make for Brexit. The fact that you have to take so many of these laws and chuck them out. I mean, just the sheer number of laws that are being... So the right-wingers are listing, this law, this law, this law. All these laws aren't made by Parliament anymore. They're all gone. And just when you see that, how could you object to that? Nobody can object to that. And so the left have to ignore it completely.
Now, I just wonder how easy it is for that to actually get done. What, do they just take them off the book?
Yes, they're done. And this is why Brexit is so astounding. Obama got a lot of attention from people recently because he was speaking at the UN and he said that Americans are going to have to give up some of their freedoms for the globalist agenda. He was where he basically said, and it's all a little bit of freedom. You know, I was talking to a leftist yesterday, and he said he only said a little bit of freedom. Apparently, you know, the thin end of the wedge is not a phrase that occurs to anybody on the left anymore, and it's obvious that no one but the most naive simpleton is going to listen to that and think, oh, it's just a little bit. So we now know who all the naive simpletons are, because yeah, a little bit of freedom. Don't worry, America. It's only the thing your ancestors fought and died for. It's only the whole point of the country. Just a little bit of that, you know. It's just a tiny little Faustian pact. It's just a little deal with the devil.
They're either naive or they are surreptitious.
You're only a little bit damned now. I mean, that's all. You know, it's just a little bit of something that's entirely wrong. A little bit of dictatorship. And it's the same thing. But we see with the EU that that's not where that's where it begins. It's not where it ends, because loads and loads of laws have now got to be scrapped in the UK. Huge numbers of European laws are now toast.
It's like a precedent in history, precedent setting in history to de-empirize.
Yeah.
I mean, to be swallowed up by an empire and be so snug with it, and to just say, we're done. That's just...
Well, at the end of the day, Britain sees itself as the center of the world. I mean, we still see ourselves as Rule Britannia. At the end of the day, the idea of being part of someone else's empire is insufferable. I mean, there's an actual film that deals with this attitude called The 51st State, with Samuel L. Jackson and Meatloaf. And there is a line at the end where Samuel L. Jackson, known as Meatloaf's character, gets really annoyed with these British people who keep screwing them over. And he says, you're nothing but the 51st State, to referring to Britain. He then proceeds to explode and shower blood over everybody. It's like the ultimate FU to America moment. It's absolutely beautiful, because the whole idea of us being part of the 51st State is unacceptable. And this is America, the greatest country in the world apart from Britain. It wouldn't be that much of a bad thing to be the 51st State of America. I personally wouldn't have a problem with that, because then I could finally have my First Amendment rights recognized and my Second Amendment rights recognized, or my rights, period. It's just not good enough. I wouldn't mind, because obviously as an objectivist it would be paradise for me. But at the same time, as a British person, I would much rather Britain just became an empire again and just became another second. So that way there'd be two world, because America being the only superpower, that's a problem. I mean, it's easier to blame America to foist post-colonial narratives on everybody's throats if America's the only superpower. I wonder
about that, because I don't think, let's assume for a moment that Soviet Russia was as weak and as incompetent as Ayn Rand would have us believe. Assume that for a moment.
Well, it's just validated by history.
Then there wasn't actually any other superpower. There was only America.
There was in terms of armaments, though. There was in terms of nukes.
What if they actually couldn't have gotten more than 5 bombers?
They probably could. They could. They were weak and incompetent in terms of infrastructure, in terms of actual economic. Because she was talking about fundamental economic vitality, the amount of mines, the amount of economic productivity and wealth creation that Russia indulged in the Soviet Union was minuscule compared to America. Not to mention the amount of intellectual and artistic creativity. Soviet Union culture basically was the Kalashnikov and a couple of green helicopters, and that was basically it. That was their culture. It's called Soviet chic, and when you actually look at Soviet chic, it doesn't consist of all that much, because they didn't really produce all that much that's culturally mimetic. But they still had the nukes, and so it was essentially a superpower, albeit like a primitive, like caveman culture was. They got enough clubs, they can do some damage, but then they're not producing anything beyond that.
Right. Well, then then we can prove that there has only been one superpower since 1945.
Yeah, pretty much.
The world did what it did during that time.
Yeah. I mean, well, the thing is, I like the idea of Britain being another superpower again, because that way there'd be two good guys, and there would be differences enough so that there'd be interesting contrasts between the two superpowers, but it wouldn't be like facing Armageddon. It would be a positive rather than, because we're used to the idea of two superpowers, one being so different from the other that there's tremendous tension, which is why people are worried about China becoming a superpower, or Putin somehow making Russia a superpower again, which I sincerely doubt.
It's always the Athens and Sparta idea.
Yeah, and I'd rather just have two Athens. Thank you very much.
That would be very nice.
Yeah. But I mean, the main reason we left the EU, as I say, was just that it's insane. I mean, it's run by people whose ideas are insane, ideologies. But when you actually break it down, if you look at the laws that we were forced upon us, a lot of them are a bit odd. A lot of them are a bit, because they're invented by Brussels bureaucrats who live in a planet of all of their own. But it's difficult to sort of get people excited about that and galvanized, because it's a bunch of dry laws. If you look at a lot of the anti-EU material that was made, early UKIP stuff, early Nigel Farage stuff, there's videos of it that was made in the 90s, for example. It's a dry economics lecture. But then the immigration issue happened. And that changed everything, because the open borders policy in Europe is so suicidally stupid that it became a really clear case that this is what the EU is. The EU is about social engineering. It's about population manipulation of a very sick nature. I mean, Angela Merkel's belief that that Germany can just absorb millions of people from the most backward countries in the world is so insane that that's why she's just losing all the elections. And the people can see that. People can see this is what the EU is. The EU means millions of immigrants from Turkey, for example.
Now they want their own army.
Yeah.
That's going to be a beautiful thing, eh?
Yeah. I mean, this is the point. This is the point. This is not what the EU is supposed to be. People compare it to the federal system in America, but America was built from the ground up with that system. It was supposed to be that system from the start. That was the agreement. That was the federal system. That was a compromise between all the delegates from the states. That was the whole point of it.
You said the trade empire by the back door through trade is the...
Yeah, because it was supposed to be, the EU started out as a common market treaty, and that was the entire point of it. It wasn't supposed to be more than that. And then it became political, then it became legal, then it became all these laws that were made, and now an army. And this is not what the EU was supposed to be.
I wonder how many empires started that way, because the British Empire would go into a territory with trade outposts, and then
but it was pretty... Yeah, on a micro level, yes. But if you looked at the big pictures, obviously Britain was an empire. We were an empire long before. But with the EU, this is literally backdoor from nothing, because the EU technically is not Europe, of course. It's not European countries.
It's building an empire the only way you can in the modern world, probably.
Yeah, through backdoors and treaties. And the whole point is that the EU is just a room full of Brussels bureaucrats. That's literally all the EU really is. I mean, the trade deals that go on between countries, we could do that between countries. You know, in other words, it's like a network system. All we do is take out the central hub and just have all the computers in the network talk to each other, if you see what I mean. So it's not a single hierarchy. It's more of an interconnecting web. That's all you need in a trade sense. And, it would be a bit more complicated, but at least the countries would have control over their own economic situations. And different countries have different laws, and they have different cultures, and so that's going to affect the economy in different ways. And so you need different economic circumstances. You need economic autonomy within a country to a certain degree.
Centralized control over trade, you say, would be more complicated if it's not centralized.
No, it's more complicated when it's not centralized. Yeah, because the centralization would at least supposedly make it simple. But what it does is it creates more bureaucracy.
But simple for who? Now, it does create a simpler economy if you have controls. I mean, you wipe out a lot of businesses that would have been doing things, and they're not.
You wipe out a lot of the individual quirks of each nation.
Yeah, and you wipe out diversity in the economy when you have controls.
Yeah, because the countries that no longer have economic autonomy, they can't basically say, we're not going to trade with this, we're not going to do that. So can't put a stop to it. It's free. I mean, we want free trade, but at the same time, not if it means that somebody is accruing more power, and that's the problem. The trade, managing the bureaucracy of this open trade system in the EU required a institution, required bureaucrats, and then it required politicians, and then it just sort of built up and built up and built up until it became this tiny little black cancer dot sitting in the middle of Brussels that somehow manages to control everything else in Europe. And it's just watching this monster grow is fascinating.
Yeah,
Because, as I say, this is not what we signed up for.
it's toothless right now, but if it gets an army, it might not be so
Well,
toothless.
it's not toothless in terms of law. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, watching American leftists shake their heads and go, "How could Britain have left the EU?" I'm just thinking to myself, America declared independence due to unfair taxation and no taxation without representation. That was the idea. And that was exactly why we left. We had laws and taxes being imposed on us by the EU, and we didn't recognize that the EU had a right to do so. They
And
weren't
people on the
represented.
left despise that. People on the left
Yeah.
would not be
The left are the left are, this sounds like something Limbaugh would have said. Well, I never can believe I'm saying this, but the left are anti-American. They're actually un-American and anti-American. They betray themselves. If they don't get Brexit, if it doesn't occur to them why, this is why, because a lot of Americans love Brexit because they're American. That's the point. If you disagree with Brexit, you disagree with the whole point of America, because it's exactly the same principle. The EU does not represent the British people. They make laws which screw the British people over. For example, there's a town in England called Grimsby, and it was a fishing port. It was the busiest fishing port in the country. They had haddock fishing mostly, and they had trawlers that were out all over the place. And then the EU came, and then our politicians sold our own country down the river to the EU, and then they basically Grimsby lost access to huge amounts of fishing territory to Norway, and as a result, the fishing industry in Grimsby basically collapsed. It's still there, but it's limping along, and it's nothing like it used to be. And that's just one example where these politicians. This is an interesting phenomena. This certainly occurs among politicians in the American politicians in the UN. Look at the way that the moment Obama gets in front of that podium in the UN, he instantly starts selling his own country down the river. It's clear that he just uses, he doesn't care about America, doesn't see himself as a representative of America, doesn't like America. It's just his country that he's stuck with, but it's his ticket to the big picture. What he wants is a UN position, probably more than anything else. The UN is where he gets to hobnobs with all the other gods of Olympus, because that's how they see themselves. And it's the same thing with the EU. All these EU politicians, the moment that they stop representing a country locally and they go onto the EU stage, all of a sudden, the country they represent is just some minor inconvenience. They'll say whatever it takes to be able to hobnob with the EU gods of Olympus.
Yeah,
that's the mindset that these leaders have.
Yeah.
The moment they become representative of the country as a whole, the country as a whole is an abstraction to a certain degree.
It's funny how nationalism and the jingoism and a belief in your own nation and patriotism has such a bad name, because I guess because of historical.
Yeah, but those weren't nationalists.
Mussolini, Hitler, etc. And yet, socialism doesn't have a bad name. It's destroyed Soviet Russia. It destroyed Eastern Europe. It destroyed China up until they went free trade. It's destroying North Korea. It doesn't have a bad name. But nationalism, pride in your own nation, does.
Yeah, I mean, this is the absurdity of it. I mean, we don't want collectivism and tribalism, and nationalism could often be tribalistic and collectivist. But at the same time, if your country is good, it's not irrational or immoral to approve of your country. Being a patriot of America or Britain makes sense, because Britain and America are brilliant countries. My country produced the greatest minds of all time, and your country was built by the greatest minds of all time. No problem. It's just that we've had a lot of idiots since then on both sides. But when you're proud of a country like Germany, that is okay, I guess. Germany had some good cultural achievements in the 18th century. In 17th, 18th centuries, but to then use that to justify invasion and racial supremacy, that's taking it in a ridiculous direction. But it's not like that logically follows or anything. After all, my country wasn't like that, and it was British pride that caused us to. Remember what Churchill said: "We'll fight them on the beaches. We will never surrender." What was that? That was national pride. It was nationalism versus national. It was good nationalists destroying the bad nationalists.
Yeah.
It wasn't internationalists. After all, the closest thing to internationalists that fought the Nazis was the Soviet Union, which committed just as many atrocities as the Nazis.
More.
Yeah, yeah. But technically, up until that point that they committed about, then they carried on committing more atrocities because they lasted longer. The Nazis would probably commit. It's you give them however much time, and they will commit so many atrocities. Certainly, they killed as many people as they could, as fast as they could. I'll give them that. But the internationalism, when was that ever a good thing? Internationalism is just, and globalism is another word for empire. I mean, it's Hitler and the Kaiser before him and Stalin. They were all imperialists. They were internationalists. They were globalists. But there was international communism. It was imperialism.
Yeah.
And when was that ever a good thing? Unless you happen to believe that you represent a culture which is genuinely superior. And in the case of British imperialism or American imperialism, I don't mind it. British imperialism gave rule of law to parts of the world that had never seen it before. And American imperialism is the reason why South Korea and Germany and Japan are great countries as opposed to the cesspits they were before. So imperialism itself can be a good thing, but only when it is based on really specific principles. And the globalism isn't. And the EU isn't, or the UN isn't. It's not based on that kind of crap. It's not imperialism by an enlightened country with a specific focus. It's the absence of a specific focus. It's a mess. It's just a floating morass of political correctness, socialist principles, dogmas, and of course, in the case of the UN, a bunch of Islamic crap as well.
It's probably, if you looked at it historically, it's probably machinery being set up and readied for
I don't think there's a coherent enough ideology for that.
Well, I mean, I don't mean purposefully, but I mean that once
it could be used that way. Yes.
Once everyone gets once everyone's neck is in the same leash, then all you need is a bad guy to come along and grab the leash. You know.
Yeah. This is why both the Republicans and Democrats are guilty of sitting by and letting their man, when he's in charge of the White House, build up executive power. Yeah, I mean, but the Democrats criticized the Republicans when Bush was growing the executive branch, and the Republicans are now criticizing. This is the problem with Trump. Because I was talking to the alt-right a lot. I was talking to yesterday. I was in a debate with a race realist on the alt-right. That was interesting. And the problem with the alt-right is that they're a mirror image of SJWs. They're deliberately anti-SJWs. They're anti-far left. I get that, but the problem is that the true alternative to SJW culture and the collectivism of the far left is individualism, not a rival tribalism, not a rival collectivism. This is what they don't understand. And it's the same problem with Trump. Trump is seen, because I've been watching a lot of Alex Jones lately, a lot of InfoWars. Fascinating stuff. He sees Trump as a savior who's going to save us from the globalists and the far left nutbaggery of Hillary Clinton. But the problem is that he's missing the point completely. If he doesn't get in, then we're screwed because Hillary Clinton comes in. But the problem is that even if he gets in, what if he only lasts 4 years? Or even if he gets his 8 years, what if someone like Clinton gets in after 8 years? You need to actually, it's a stopgap. Trump is a stopgap at best against that kind of thing. I don't know. You need...
I don't know if he's even that good. I mean...
Yeah, but assuming he is, even if everything the alt-right hope about Trump is true, let's assume Trump is everything the alt-right hope he is, everything that Alex Jones hopes he is. The problem is he's an authoritarian too. He's not going to reduce the power of the executive branch. The problem is that the future of America shouldn't hang in the balance in every presidential election, which is what's happening now. This is why the presidential elections are so contentious and violent.
Well, I can just imagine Trump's reaction when somebody comes to him and says, so-and-so can't do such and such this thing, and there's this law. And Trump says, why is that law? And they say, because this department does so-and-so. And he finds out about some little piddly department messing things up, and he wipes the department out and fires everybody in that department. I could totally see Trump doing things like that.
Yeah.
And what I don't see Trump doing is saying, what we need is a massive new bureaucracy to cover this or that because government does such a good job. I don't think Trump...
Well, I don't know. It depends if he listens to Ivanka. Because Ivanka's practically a socialist, and she'll just go, "Daddy, can I have a pony or a vast bureaucracy?" And he'll go, "Okay, Puddin, you can have a bureaucracy." I'm not even going to attempt to try his voice.
Well, he has such a contempt for government because of the Wellman rink. You know about the Wellman rink in New York. He hates government. He hates bureaucrats. He hates bungling, slow people. He gets things done.
But in order to get things done, he has to have power, and that means he has to maintain the level of executive bloat that Obama and Bush created. He's not going to reduce the size of the executive branch of the government as a whole, because that'll be reducing his. He's an ego guy. He likes to grow. He likes things big, and it goes against his principles.
He might consider that getting things done, wiping out these people and firing them, and telling them go get.
Well, yeah, I mean, he might. I mean, let's just say he gets rid of the IRS. Or he gets rid of the Department of Education and things like that. That would be great. But yeah, I mean, that'd be hilarious. The left would absolutely explode. But even if he wanted to do that, rather than use those things as tools of his ego, the Democrats wouldn't let him. I mean, it's
we would have to have massive sweeping wins by the Tea Party all across the nation to get things like that done.
Yeah, I mean, it would be that would be good, but no, there needs to be a reduction in the size of government, a reduction in the executive branch. This is what the left and the right don't. They understand it, and yet they don't do anything about it. It's hair raising that to constantly, because Alex, as I say, if you listen to Alex Jones, he basically thinks that if Hillary gets in, it's the end of the republic, and I think that it won't be the immediate end, but it'll be yet another step in the wrong direction.
Another nail in the coffin, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the point. But the nails are getting bigger and bigger and bigger because the executive.
Obama's not out of office yet, and he wants to postpone the elections. And if Hillary's sick or if Hillary loses, if Trump wins by 65% or something, then they probably will postpone the elections.
Well, I mean, let's hope my hypothesis is correct that he's now a lame duck. Because, as you pointed out, he failed to successfully veto something recently.
Well, he'll use executive order in his ATF private police force of 40,000 crack troops or something like that.
Well, maybe, but I mean, I think at this point, as I say, he's focusing on the golf course and his next UN speech.
Yeah, I hope so.
When we see the true Obama, the true imperialistic, arrogant, sanctimonious, America-hating globalist, whenever he gets up on the UN. Whenever he delivers a UN speech, that's the real Obama. That's the guy who the known Chomsky cultural Marxist who blames America for all the problems in the world and wants to basically shrink America. Now, not the government of America, just America's power as a whole. I mean, he wants to create a Europe, because if you look at the European socialist societies, they have big government but small military. But America's the other way around, or at least it's supposed to be. And what the European socialists don't understand, and the pro-European socialist leftists in America, is that the reason why the European countries and Scandinavian countries can have big government but small military is because America picks up the slack, both in terms of economic power, trade power, in invention and entrepreneurialism, which Europe benefits from, but also in terms of the military. That vast military America has, that's apparently so too ultra mega big, according to the left, is protecting a huge percentage of the world's surface, because the world is, Europe and Scandinavia is full of useless socialists who don't believe in them having a military. They just believe in solving the military budget.
We've got 10,000 troops parading up and down Poland and Eastern Europe on those corridors just to let Putin know that area is armed.
Yeah, but I mean, it's... Yeah, but I mean, that's literally all there is, and that's nothing compared to what Russia could use. I mean, we do need to grow NATO, make no mistake about it, but obviously an EU military would be terrible, because at the end of the day, it would be used to enforce a socialist nightmare, whereas NATO, because it's aligned with America, actually is part of a proper belief in freedom. It's the right kind of structure. An EU military would not be for the protection of European people from Russia. It would be to enforce socialist dogmas. I mean, look at
NATO. I guess there are NATO forces, but it's the alliance forces. It's not a separate army from. It's not like like the UN army. Is it? Are there NATO alliances that are separate and they're like the UN army? I think they're all paid for by America.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, I do worry that, because Trump doesn't take Putin and Russia as a threat, which, I mean, it's...
Well, I don't know about that. I think that he thinks it's a very serious threat, but I think that he's dealing with Putin the best way he knows how, and he's dealt with bullies and mean guys, and he knows.
Well, he may be going for a strength but respectful approach. You know, I'm strong, but I respect you. I'm not going to demonize you, because the left, they demonize Russia and Putin like crazy, which is a bizarre thing, because that's more of an echo of the demonization of the Soviet Union by the right. So now the left are basically using the right-wing playbook and demonizing Russia as this big enemy. And it's interesting watching there, because Alex Jones is apparently a puppet of Putin, and the Brexit vote was apparently orchestrated by Putin, and all these things, everything that they don't like now is part of a vast global conspiracy by Putin. And I'm just thinking, everyone on the left is Alex Jones now, just for the other side.
Yeah.
But Alex Jones is pro Putin. This is the bizarre thing. I mean, it's the left and the right are dividing very sharply over their interpretation of Putin. It's the strangest but bizarrest thing. And they're both wrong, because Putin is an ass, but he's not a global mastermind. He's not, because Russia is not a competent country, because it's rigidly tyrannical.
Well, after they disassembled the Soviet Union, they had a period of free trade for about 15 years, which really, really ramped up the amount of wealth in their society. I mean, they produced more wealth in that 15 years of free trade than they had in the previous 70 years of communism. So now we're facing a Russia with better oil wells and better machinery and better airplanes and better roads and better factories and more computers and more education. And
but it's still rigidly authoritarian, and tyranny equals incompetence. This is one of the genius things about it.
Controlled economy gets hold of a large amount of wealth, it short circuits and goes violent. That's a historical.
Yeah, but it also starts to run out the clock, because there's only so much time that those things can survive, because they don't have the vitality to generate wealth. That's the good thing. That's the good thing. The Putin's regime has a definite limit to it. The Chinese too, because they're too rigid to be able to really. Because all it takes is a crash or two, or a shortage or two, and the whole thing come tumbling down. China nearly had a total collapse last year.
They don't always end peacefully. Venezuela may or may not end peacefully. Soviet Russia ended peacefully, but Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan did not.
No. Well, the issue is what's going to happen with an economic crash, because America is a demonstration of this as well, because we know that in a free market there's going to be crashes, and crashes are good, because crashes are resets. Bubbles are created by false statistics, calculations, and mistakes and errors, overproduction or whatever. And what happens is that the bubble bursts because reality finally kicks in, because the free market is responsive, is plastic to reality to a certain degree. And whereas controlled economy is based on the arbitrary whims of leaders and centralized bureaucrats, and so the bubbles can be indefinitely maintained, and so you can end up with an illusionary economy for an extended period of time. And when there is a crash, it'll be that much worse. And
that translates to a larger amount of waste and a larger imbalance. So
yeah, but when it does crash, the free market is, whenever there was an economic crash in the 19th century or under Calvin Coolidge, the presidents didn't do anything, the government didn't do anything. They were hands off on the economy, because they knew better. They had better understanding in the 19th century of economics than leaders do today, which is bizarre. And Calvin Coolidge was a genius, because he did nothing, which is exactly what every president should do. He vetoed every single bill that came across his desk. Oh my God, he was beautiful. And then you got, unfortunately, Hoover and Roosevelt, who were interventionists. And so when there was the Wall Street crash, they intervened, and the level of intervention was so excessive that it damaged the recovery cycle of the economy. It's like a natural heartbeat goes up, and then it goes down a bit, and then it settles. Up, down, settle, up, down. That's the actual heartbeat. When you actually defibrillate right in the middle of the downbeat, you're just because you think, oh God, the heartbeat's going down, when it's just the reaction to the previous up, you end up killing the patient. The heartbeat is supposed to go up and down. That's part of the natural pattern. That's part of the natural cycle. And trying to defibrillate just because you don't understand that the heartbeat is up and down and start and stop, it is absolutely insane. And that's unfortunately what's happened with China. They overreacted to a market crash last year and nearly destroyed the whole system. Russia may end up facing the same problem, because you've got interventionists in charge. I worry about the same thing in America because there was a lot of the intervention that the government responded to in 2008 to the housing bubble created terrible problems. What was that law that was created after 2008?
Sarbanes-Oxley, I believe.
Sarbanes-Oxley, that kind of thing. It's an overreaction because they don't understand that it was their intervention that caused the crash in the first place, and it's the market alone that would fix it. And this is what they don't understand. They think the market creates the crashes and the government needs to fix it. No, the government creates the crashes and the market needs to fix it. They have totally the wrong way around. And again, this isn't a matter of opinion or ideology. Economics can be studied like science and should be considered a scientific field.
The problem is that always the answer in economics is just leave it the fuck alone and let people do whatever they want. That's always the answer. Nobody likes that answer. They want to figure it out themselves and tell other people the right answer.
Yeah, because they're megalomaniacs. They're authoritarians.
And how many people are you going to find who just say, I'll do my thing and you do your thing and you leave everyone else, including me, alone? Not very many people are like that, especially not people who've been elected to office.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real tragedy.
Yeah. There's no way out of it except philosophy, which is an uphill slog. But
yes. Yeah. Let's see what next topic. I was discussing the interesting security situation. There's a liberal article that says that both sides in the election debate are concentrating too much on terrorism, and there's this left-wing talking point that's going around that's like there's less than 0.01% chance of you being killed in a jihadi terrorist attack. That's been going around all over the place, and they're sort of missing the point there. And the point is that the terrorist attacks that occur, or even if it's 1, 2, or 3, is 1, 2, or 3 too many. And all of the ones that have occurred in America and Europe were avoidable. And the reason why these people should have been stopped is because they were already on watch lists. They're already known. And it was because of the left and because of political correctness that they weren't picked up. I mean, this attitude that, oh, well, the chances are so low, that's exactly the attitude that causes the ones that we have. Yeah. And if you see that attitude, because again, the problem with the left, the single biggest fact that could be used to disprove the left in America is the existence of Europe. That's the problem here. Every single time you want to debunk what the left is trying to sell America, you just look at the fact that Europe has already implemented it to a greater degree and it's a mess. So this complacency, we shouldn't be focusing on terrorism. This is just politicians trying to scare people. Trying to be cautious about terrorism isn't fear tactics. This is a real problem, and you have to have awareness of the problem in order to avoid it at all. To say, the chances are insignificant. Tell it to the people that have been killed. You unsympathetic social.
They fetishize Europe. The left in America fetishizes Europe to the point where they actually want massive numbers of Muslim immigrants to come here.
Yeah. Well, they did the same thing in the Cold War. I mean, the left are always siding with the worst dictatorships and tyrannies of the world. In the Cold War, they were fetishizing the Soviet Union and the communist societies. And now they're doing the same thing with Islam. They really are the most vile, bankrupt people imaginable. Liberals and progressives, because, as I say, they don't act like monsters, but then you think about it, they side with people that do. During the 50s and 60s, Ayn Rand spent a considerable amount of time, as did other people, fighting liberals again because they were constantly denying the atrocities of Stalin and Mao, and constantly saying that the communist systems were good, the Marxist systems were good. Look, after all, it was the 60s we saw the rise of this image of Che Guevara as this messianic-like figure of beauty and innocence. He was a mass-murdering psychopath. And they just don't care. And so this is the interesting thing about the left. They're total moral nihilists. They don't necessarily do or believe in evil things themselves, because most of them don't have the balls, because they're a bunch of spineless beta male idiots. But they have zero problem and making endless excuses on whitewashing the most evil mass murderers of our time. And this has been consistent for generations now.
Well, mostly they insist that you do nothing as evil gains power. So they are the fulfillment of that old saying that in order for evil to win, it is only necessary that good men do nothing.
Yeah, but they don't just do nothing. I mean, they offer excuses. I mean, they offer excuses for Islam. They offer excuses for Stalin and Mao. I mean, they offer excuses for all the evils.
Right.
I mean,
And they
it was
themselves
they
don't.
did the same thing. This actually was in the First World War as well. The liberals in Parliament were the main reason why Britain didn't react to the imperialistic expansion of Germany early on, because they were convinced that Germany wasn't going to do anything wrong. They're not going to go into Belgium. They're not going to invade neutral territory. And then they did. And then that shut the liberals up for a while. And we were able to actually, finally start dealing with this problem. And this keeps happening. They just refuse to recognize the problems. It's the same thing with where they gave Putin the reset button, for example. What did he do immediately after that? He invaded Ukraine. And they just have this they just believe in just making nice with evil. And of course, that's one of the reasons why it's so bizarre that they're now all of a sudden saying, oh, well, Putin is the worst thing ever. It's because they need a bogeyman, but it can't be a real evil. Well, I don't know. I mean, he's kind of evil, but not as sort of, he's not worth starting World War III over.
Well, what's he going to do? What's his next thing? Is he happy now? He's got Syria and Crimea. He's happy now.
Well, I don't think he wants Syria. I think he wants Assad propped up long enough for him to be able to hold an election and get out of power. Because I don't think Assad wants to stay in power any longer, because he knows he's too divisive for Syria's stability.
All right. Well, I think that Russia wants Syria so that they can have a warm water port in the Mediterranean.
Well, that might be the case. I mean, this is the thing. I don't think they could afford it. I mean, the cost of imperialist expansion of Syria would be huge. I mean, they can't even afford the military interventions they're currently undergoing, because they'd be fighting some front of jihadism if they were to try to do that for generations.
Yeah, well, maybe they like that.
No, they can't afford it. So Russia's economy is hanging by a thread.
Well, I think Putin quite likes to have a bit of news stuff. We bombed shit out.
But he just wants enough for some positive coverage, and then that's it. So the RT get even more, stick their tongues even further up his butt, and then that's it. And then he'll move on to some other vanity project.
I think.
But a permanent occupation of Syria would be absolutely crippling as far as the economy was concerned. It would be. It would be like America and Iraq. It would cost trillions.
Yeah, I think that they're basically vanity projects.
Yeah, because he's smart. He's not an idiot. He knows. Unlike Bush and unlike Obama, he actually is an intelligent ruler.
Yeah, he wasn't elected. Well, I mean.
He is actually popular enough to be elected, but then so was Hitler during most of his reign. It doesn't make any. A lot of these leaders are the way they are, a lot of the people are the way they are, that it doesn't make any difference. So a lot of Russians are authoritarian, a lot of Germans were authoritarian, and so whether or not these people are democratically elected is meaningless. This is why all this stuff about democracy versus dictatorship is a false dichotomy. It doesn't make any difference. You can still end up with the same kind of regimes. Most dictatorships throughout history, if they'd held elections, would have got in. Yeah. That's the irony of it.
And let's say Putin was elected. We really trust those election results, right? Those are very...
no, but the thing is, he could easily legitimately win, because he is beloved. The Russian people don't want this globalist crap any more than Americans do, well, real Americans. And so Putin is seen as a nationalist hero. And that's what a lot of people really want. People want the national... None of the people wanted the EU. This is the thing. This is why the left was so shocked that Brexit occurred, because they don't get it. They don't get it at all. The people of any given country do not want to be absorbed into a globalist regime. Nobody wants that. I mean, that's the ridiculous thing, because it's not just patriotism, it's not just pride, it's not just nationalism, it's common sense. Because we have enough trouble controlling the politicians that we know, the politicians from our own countries, the politicians that are local representatives or national representatives. The idea of foreigners controlling us from thousands of miles away is ridiculous. It doesn't hold up to a second worth of thought, which is typically about the amount of thought that people put into politics.
Happens, but it's rare. Very, very few cultures want to be absorbed or asked to be absorbed.
Yeah, and so this is why Brexit happened. This is why there's so many people against globalism. This is why Trump is occurring, the alt-right, and why Putin is popular, and why the alt-right like Putin, and why the alt-right also like Brexit. It's because at the end of the day, we're all more likely to be nationalists than the opposite, because the opposite counterintuitive.
Right.
I mean, it's taken generations of post-colonialist indoctrination and brainwashing to get people to the state where they hate America, to get morons like Kaepernick to refuse to stand for the flag. Yeah, I mean, his reason is that America as a whole is somehow tainted by one or two flaws in the system. Yeah, and that's the idea. It's an excuse to dismiss the whole thing, to disrespect the whole country, the whole flag, or the whole anthem, or whatever. Something symbolic of the whole is to disrespect something symbolic of the whole is to basically really dismiss the whole thing. It's anti-nationalism.
So what's this about now? I missed if you changed
Kaepernick.
NFL player.
I was talking about Kaepernick.
Oh, I don't know what that is. Is that the guy?
Yeah, that's the guy that kneels for the national anthem. He's a Black Lives Matter idiot.
He kneels?
He kneels for the national anthem rather than standing for it. He's a Black Lives Matter guy.
Huh.
His approach is he's part of a lot of these people that want to blame the whole of the country for
now,
one or
so
two
there's
problems.
the guy that remains sitting and just ignores it, right?
Yeah, there's a number of people that have all started to do this because they're like sheep. They all start to follow the blind leading the blind, basically. And the whole thing is that they invent a problem and then it doesn't get solved because it doesn't really exist. Like racist cops, for example, they haven't been able to find a single example of an actual racist cop actually killing black people. At least not in any of the cases that are like that cause celebs of BLM. And yet they keep insisting that this is a huge problem. But of course, it's not going to get solved because it doesn't exist. And so they use that to blame the whole country because ultimately it is about denigrating the entire country because this is post-colonialism. The purpose of post-colonialism, postmodernism, critical theory is to denigrate the whole of the West, the whole of that particular Western country, so that they can break the country down for the purposes of Marxist redistribution and rebuilding. I mean, it's basically a sort of, instead of revolution, they're going to use a sort of moral degradation, morale degradation. That's currently the left. That's critical theory. That's post-colonialism. So it's taken generations of indoctrination along those lines to get to that state where anti-nationalism is a real thing. Anti-nationalists, they're the violent ones. It's
all
the
right. I don't know what you're talking about now.
Well, I'm talking about I'm talking about Black Lives Matter mostly.
Oh, okay. You're just saying anti-colonial. You're just saying a bunch of big things. I didn't know what you were talking about.
Yeah,
because we're talking about Russia, we're talking about EU, we're talking about. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's all interconnected. There is right now the left are anti-nationalist and the right are pro-nationalist, particularly the alt-right. And it's basically a huge culture divide between those who love their country and those who hate their country. And the left hate America, because that's seen as the appropriate thing to do. As I say, this is why you take some cop shootings and use that to disrespect the flag and the anthem. It's basically the whole idea is that the whole country is somehow tainted, is brought low by one or two problems, which is not even what the civil rights activists said during in the 60s. Even they didn't say the whole country was wrong. Just it was, Martin Luther King still loved America. It's just that he basically recognized that there were some serious problems that need to be addressed. But he knew that the country would be a better place for it, hence the I have a dream speech. Whereas the other side, the Malcolm X side, the liberation theology side, the Reverend White, Obama's Reverend White, the whole goddamn America, that kind of mindset is now the norm on the left, where any problems in America, real or imagined, because there are real problems in America, but they're not the problems of the left, because the left don't want to acknowledge the real problems because they created them.
All right.
And so the whole idea is this: there is this massive anti-nationalism, which is the product of critical theory and post-colonial narratives. Critical theory and post-colonialism are both academic fields that were created by cultural Marxists in university.
Right. So it's Marxism. It's Marxism.
Yeah, but it's cultural Marxism. And the whole idea of cultural Marxism is to use culture wars to break down the will and the morale of a country in the West.
So the left is Marxist.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of them now, and whether they know it or not. So I mean, they don't. I was talking to a liberal the other day, and she says, "I'm not a Marxist, but I support BLM." Well, BLM's Marxist. She supports Marxists, so they're Marxists, but they don't even realize it because they're useful idiots.
Right. All right. Yeah. All right. The left is definitely Marxist. That's even Islam.
Yeah. Well, no. As I say, yes, I know you like to bring it down to that, but I do. Well, I mean, Islam is older than Marxism. It just uses.
No. The sleepy Islam in the desert is older than Marxism. The violent jihad, subjugate.
No, because the violent jihad is the beginning of Islam. That goes back to the beginning.
I know. But come on. Look what Islam was 100 years ago, and look what it is now that it's been infiltrated by Marxism.
But there's another explanation. The reason why it was sleepy in the 19th century was because the West was unapologetically strong. Cultural Marxism has weakened America, and that's made Islam strong. It isn't that Marxism has strengthened Islam, it's that Marxism has weakened the West.
No, their leaders, all of the leaders in Marxism, in Islam, came to the West for schooling.
Yeah.
They are all Western educated. So
yes. Well, that's where they learnt what Marxism was doing to the West. Though
that's where they
figured it out. Yeah, no, they didn't. They didn't adopt it for themselves. They recognized it as that it was a useful. Like if you look at the Holy Land Foundation trial memo leaks, they were basically talking about political correctness and the progressives and how these people could be used to guilt trip the West into capitulating to Islamic encroachment.
Right.
And so this is the point. They are using Marxism to destroy the West in the same way that the West are using, the Marxists are using their own tools to destroy the West. They're both basically the West, and there's basically a race now to destroy Western civilization between the Marxists and the Islamists because they both want to be standing on top of the rubble at the top. It's just that they, obviously the Marxists would rather it was just them, and the Islamists would rather it was just them. At the end of the day, the Marxists and the Islamists will turn on each other the moment they've destroyed Western civilization. They just agree to sort of lay off each other until then. That's what's really going on.
I don't know how separate the groups are, so we'll see.
Well, let's just say there is a kind of symbiosis between the two, but Islam is a purist ideology. It will extricate itself from any Marxist elements the moment it can, because this is what ISIS do. ISIS are pure Islam. There's no Marxism there. In some of their propaganda methods, because they want to reach the Western audiences, they use Marxist techniques. They use post-colonial narratives. All jihadis have been doing that for decades. But in terms of their practices, the way they treat women, the way they treat gays, the political system, the legal system, that's 100% pure Islam. That's Muhammad and Abu Bakr level Islam. That's like Islam 1.0. And so that's what it's ultimately boiling down to. Islam is a regressive ideology that will always return to its default state given the opportunity. Because the pull towards that...
If Marxism is anti-capitalism, then they might be okay with a lot of the things Islam does, like the equality of the sexes that Marxism is supposedly big on, is just because capitalism didn't have equality of the sexes at that time. Now, if Islam doesn't have equality of the sexes, then that's okay because at least they're not capitalist. They're not subjugating women. They're protecting women. They're keeping women honored. They're keeping women safe. There's all kinds of reasons a Marxist could get in bed with subjugating women.
Well, they've already done it. They've already started it because look at the whole sort of fainting couch feminism. Where they basically play victim, and they look at the Anita Sarkeesian technique, where she basically uses the trolls on the internet to sort of play damsel in distress all the time and go crying to the United Nations so that they can enforce her fascistic agenda. I mean, they used to.
Women are a protected, special, delicate, all these rules around them.
It fits. Feminism and Islamic oppression of women are perfectly compatible because feminism is just a mask for cultural Marxism, and cultural Marxists believe in a hierarchy of oppression. And if you put women at the top of the oppression, you can then use that to justify the subjugation of women, ostensibly under the guise of protecting them. So there is actually a perverse overlap between the subjugation of women in Islam and feminism, because they both believe in treating women fundamentally different. Neither side, neither feminists nor Islamists, believe in gender equality. They believe in a fundamental difference between the two. But with feminists, they think that they're about emancipating women, but they're really about denigrating women. They make women weaker. They make women more sensitive. They make women less capable, so they have to have a... It's the same thing with affirmative action. Affirmative action is demeaning towards black people because it says that they can't achieve anything equally. Same thing with the left-wing opposition to voter ID. It basically says black people can't get voter ID. So every time they try to supposedly give a leg up to these people, they're actually pushing them down psychologically.
Right. All right. Are we off of whatever Black Lives Matter and the left?
Yeah.
We can do what you wanted to mention. Milo's. He had a top 10 list, which is probably just going right back to what we just went over. But
yeah. Well,
he's
interesting thing is he's talking about how in the West, Muslims tend to jihadis tend to recruit redheads a lot, gingers. In huge numbers, because gingers statistically are more likely to have an inferiority complex.
Yeah,
and so they actually get recruited by Islam a lot, because Islam is a cynical, exploitative cult of evil, and so they go after the weakest in society. And so they go after people who demographics, social psychology experiments have shown that that gingers, the redheads, are more likely to be bullied, they're more likely to have inferiority complexes, etc. And so they go after disadvantaged people.
Yeah, well, they go after low IQ people as well.
But it's harder to tell. It's harder to tell that demographically or visually. So they go after the very obvious visual clues, which is why jihadis or with Western converts in Europe tend to be followed around by redheads a lot.
It's not so hard to tell. On average, it's the case that Orientals have a higher IQ. So there's not a large amount of jihad or growth of Islam radicalism among Chinese or Japanese or South Koreans. Probably not even in North Korea. But it's not really very popular with white people. Bureaucrats, the occasional government bureaucrat announces they've switched to Islam. Some you British envoy to Saudi Arabia or whatever just converted. Did you hear about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, these people are deeply perverse and twisted. So it's not. I mean, a lot of these people are far left and therefore buy into post-colonialism and therefore buy into the fake. Because the whole point with cultural Marxism is to create fake victim narratives, and Islam loves using it, seeing itself as a fake victim. And so they basically, the overlap between the left and Islam is profound, despite the fact that, as I say, I don't think it's a case of Marxism infiltrating Islam, because, as I say, Islam will purify itself of any external influence the moment it has the opportunity. The only reason why there's a sort of they're using Marxism as a kind of plug-in, as a kind of dongle, a connection device to sort of connect Islam to the West, is because the West is still a threat. The moment the West stops being a threat, they'll dump Marxism. It will have outlived its usefulness. So both Marxists and Islamists are using each other to enforce their own dogmas, but ultimately their intentions are mutually exclusive, because we've seen them try to combine communism and Islam before, and there was almost immediate puritanical rejection, a reaction to this, and a purging and making it pure. There was this constant purging cycle that Islam goes through, which is why Marxism's influence on it will only be temporary.
It's the same thing that Soviet Union constantly went through, constantly purging.
Yeah, but this is more of a grassroots thing. That was a sort of leaders purging each other, basically. This is a true cultural purity that they seek. It's the same thing. Well, Christianity does the same thing. I mean, the Pentecostals, the Methodists, the Puritans, they were all trying to get back to a sort of pure apostolic or discipleship modeled on the Gospels and the Epistles.
The Mormons too. They call themselves the only true church.
Yeah. They all sort of claim exclusivity, but with Mormons they see themselves more like Islam. It's more like they're the perfection, the improvement, the addition. So that's more of a sort of the sequel is better than the original sort of mindset.
They've even got their own book.
Yeah.
Yeah. pretty crazy. Bunch of crazy bastards, but they're not doing the jihad thing. They're trying to outproduce. They have average of like 4 or 5 kids per family in Utah.
Oh, no. Islam is doing exactly the same thing. The jihadis and the terrorists are minor flukes. The overwhelming bulk of Islam's attempts to take over the world is through population. That's why it's the fastest growing religion. It's not because they're converting people all that much, because it's a religion with a lot of bad PR, fortunately. It's just they're outproducing because women are just wombs on legs. They don't have any rights, and they just don't have babies.
Yeah, and I've heard that there's no place, or heaven isn't really, women in heaven don't really meet in Islam, but most women go to hell because women are so bad.
Yeah, most women are in hell because they're spiritually and mentally inferior to men, in according to Muhammad.
Yeah.
But I did have an interesting point. Where's my point? I'm going through my notes here. Where's my notes?
Now, wasn't there a Milo list or something you wanted to mention?
I mean, I haven't finished watching the whole thing. I'll link it here. He's basically just listing 10 things he hates about Islam. I think it's actually something like 15 things he hates about Islam. And he's just making an interesting point that these are really terrible things and that the left will do anything to try to spin them. And he's using this to drive a wedge between the gay community and the left, which is genius, because it's exactly what I'm doing. That's how you can tell it's clever, because I'm doing it too. Because it's the Orlando shooting. The Orlando shooting is the whole reason I got back into American politics. Because after Ted Cruz failed to get in, I was just done with American politics. And then the Orlando shooting happened. Watching the left try to make it about gun control and not about the Islamic community that was spewing this violent hatred, it's so perverse, because the left are obsessed with words that inspire violence. This is, by making words violence, they get to justify their war on free speech. That's the whole point. That's why they censor. That's why they ban people from Twitter and from YouTube and from the rest of social media all the time. It's because they basically want to restrict by claiming that words can lead to violence, by being obsessed with this idea of words becoming violent immediately. It's just a way of telling people to shut up. Whereas when we actually have video evidence of Orlando mosque imams preaching hatred of gays, and then a guy, whether or not he was gay is really not the point, but a Muslim going around killing 50 homosexuals, or people in a gay bar, because I've been to gay bars, that doesn't magically make me homosexual. If I were gunned down, I wouldn't be a homosexual victim, I would be a victim of an anti-gay guy. Not the same thing. But the point is, 50 victims, and the left don't immediately jump to what are these hate preachers saying? I mean, if this had been a Christian, they would have blamed the Southern Baptists. They would have blamed the Landover Baptist Church. In fact, they did. I actually saw liberal articles saying this is because of the homophobia of the Christian right. I'm just like, this was a Muslim. I mean, it's like, you don't need to go through this convoluted. Do you really hate Christians and white people that much? This is one of the reasons why I've softened on Christianity, because the hatred against Christianity from the left is absolutely pathological. I don't need to push Christianity anymore.
It's the best thing that they can do right now to distract themselves, because otherwise they actually have to give some thought to what's going on with Islam, and is it really actually dangerous, and is it right around the corner, and do we have to worry about it? And do we have to start thinking for ourselves and stop listening to politicians and start questioning the narrative and start questioning, the political correctness?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is...
Or complain about Christians. So they complain about Christians.
But it's so absurd that it's actually backfiring. I mean, this is why it is that Milo thinks that he can drive a wedge between the gay community, LGBTs, and the left. And he's right, he can. Because them looking at a massacre of homosexuals by a Muslim jihadi, and then clear, obvious evidence that there is a massive amount of murderous homophobia in the Orlando Muslim communities, and then saying this is about gun control, or this is about Christian fundamentalists. The left, the LGBT community may consist of largely morons, but they're not that stupid. They could see that the left are just acting as a smokescreen for Islam. And so exploiting that to basically show the left up, because this is such a morally degenerate thing to do. To offer coverage for a murderous ideology like this really is quite stunning.
I think it's a pretty tall order to try to get the LGBTQ community to nationally. Have a very, it's very collectivist. It's very, what is it? You all have to be the same. It's very homogenous. You have to be accepted. You have to believe certain things and express certain views. And
yes, but at the same time, even LGBTs, even leftist homosexuals have some sense of self-preservation. Even they don't want to be gunned down. I mean, in the Europe, yes, in the Europe, the politically correct and the left and the progressives are so brainwashed, they will get gunned down by jihadis while screaming, "Don't be Islamophobic" to everybody watching. They are actually at that point. We know this for a fact because we know that every time there's another Muslim atrocity, the left decry, even when they're the victims, will say, "No, this is terrible because this is going to lead to a backlash from the Muslim community. This is going to lead to Islamophobia. This is going to ruin our beautiful open borders dream." This because they, as I said, these open borders types are insane. So there's no self-preservation with them. None whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
well, they're just like the Germans who brought Nazism on themselves. Look around and say, "What have we done here?" And you know, sometimes people get what they deserve, and they're bringing civil war into Europe and talking about how they need to be peaceful and nice to people as they do it. So yeah, it's getting pretty bad.
Yeah, that's the tragedy of it. But I mean, it's interesting seeing people slowly peel away from the left as they begin to realize just how mad and insane the left are. And so hopefully, eventually, the left will be bled dry of members, and only the most fanatical will be left.
All the smart people and all the moral people are going to leave, and the only thing left will be unscrupulous idiots.
I think that they've already left. They're already the liberal. I mean, watching the transition of what's his name, Mark Rubin, watching his slow transformation from a progressive to a quasi-libertarian is fascinating, because you can see exactly why he's doing it. He represents, I think, a sizable portion of the more intelligent left, but I think it's already done. I think that left has no more decent, intelligent people left in it. This is why they're left with complete retards like Cenk Uygur. I mean, they're all just absolute morons now, because anybody with half a brain can see that this is absolutely insane.
And they become increasingly vicious.
Yes.
As they get cornered and their numbers dwindle, the intelligent people leave. Dave Rubin's an interesting case because he was pretty much a leftist jerk. You know, he was pretty left 5 years ago or whatever, maybe.
Yeah. But it's one thing after another. I mean, with me, the Orlando shooting was a really clear example. The left was now completely insane and evil. There was nothing that they will not say and do to cover up. Remember, this is 50 people being killed here, and the left's immediate instinct was to make it a gun control issue. The guy could have used pipe bombs. The guy could have used pressure cookers. Because look what happened in the recent New York attacks, where they used pressure cookers again, same as the Boston bombings. They couldn't make it about gun control, and so they basically just swept it under the rug. And then they waited for some distraction to turn up, and then that's it.
If a gun is used, it's about gun control. If no gun is used, it's ignored.
Yeah.
And we know whose side the FBI is on, because the FBI was at for the Garland, Texas thing. They were there, and they were texting the terrorists who came and got shot and killed in the parking lot by security. They were telling them where they are and how many people there were in there and stuff. Then the FBI knew about her. He had been reported to them for trying to purchase upscale body armor and stuff like this. A weapons dealer had reported him. And either his mom or his dad had reported him to the FBI. And so we know whose side the FBI is on.
Yeah, but it's the same thing with the police in Europe. The police in Europe are all politically correct traitors, pretty much. I mean, they are far more. It's not necessarily that they believe in Islam or want to support it destroying Europe. It's that they're so scared of being branded racist. They're so scared of the media and the liberal witch hunt because they actually care what liberals and progressives say. I mean, I don't care what liberals and progressives say. They're all lying shysters. I mean, they've got nothing left. Every passing day, more happens now that makes me despise them. And so I don't care if they call me racist. That means nothing to me now.
Yeah.
You know, I was called this alt-right race realist who was obsessed with like the genetics of Jews and what Jews are doing, and Jews are doing this and Jews are doing that. That's what I despise about the alt-right. They've got some real bastards on their side. And I was trying. It was a reasonable conversation. You know, he wasn't like ranting and raving, but at one point he did actually say that you know, I was into a conspiracy theory, and this is like, you've been ranting about how Jews control this and Jews do this and Jews do that, and you're accusing me of a conspiracy theory. Go ahead. I don't care. You know, you have zero credibility in that department. So yeah, being called a racist by a left winger, I don't care. You're scum. And
Yeah.
so
No, the word racist is definitely losing its.
yeah, but the problem is that so many in the media and the police and politicians are still terrified of these obsolete monsters who have no power anymore. This is why the alt-righters are doing what they're doing, because they too have realized enough is enough. These people have no power. These people just use political correctness and race and politics and white guilt and the rest of that crap. Screw them. Screw them. But none of this means anything. None of this is moral or true or good. We don't have to. Once you realize the emperor has no clothes, bam, instant. The change is instant. You don't have to be afraid of it. And the police are so backward. I mean, it's partly because the police chiefs and all that are political, basically. I mean, they have to watch their image. They're constantly obsessing over what the headlines in the next day are going to be. And so they're hypersensitive to this issue. And the police, this trickles down to the rest of the police, who have to be hypersensitive. So they have to turn a blind eye to Muslims all the time. They have to cover up the atrocities.
Hopefully, something will happen that will change the zeitgeist en masse. You know,
Well, this is
like
this is what.
11th, September 11th attacks in America overnight just changed a lot of people's attitude. When we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, there were people who were saying, no, we shouldn't go, but they were very few and far between, and nobody liked them very much. So there's got to be, hopefully there will be something, and
Well,
people in Europe will sort of like snapping out of it, like they're hypnotized, and they need to snap out of it and realize that this is serious, and they got to, that the past is the past, and we're in a different time period now.
Well, to a certain extent, that this happened with the Cologne mass sexual molestations, because you basically had when the media and specifically there was a police report. You're breaking up, so I'm going to F5 again. Okay, can you hear me okay? Oh dear, we appear to have been cut off. And oh, it's still live, so I'm not quite sure if this would still be recorded as he has now left. But if that's the case, I might as well leave too. And hopefully we can continue this in a second video that would be the Q&A.